The Story of Bragg by Countrylife. The island was visible in the distance. John and Jane were very interested in the island. They lived in Fair Oaks, and when you woke up in the morning, the island seemed to be beckoning to you. When you looked for it on the map, it seemed to be called Hannah Island, but nobody had heard of it, or if they had, there were rumours galore about it. Someone had seen a very dark cloud coming over from the island, which enveloped Fair Oaks, and then went back again. They said it was leaving a "please visit me" message in the cloud, but nobody had any reason to go there. They were too busy running their lives. Except John and Jane. They couldn't get it off their mind. So one bright day, when nothing frightened them about the island, they borrowed a boat from Alfred and went out there, and never came back, much to the consternation of friends and relatives. The dark cloud kept hovering over Fair Oaks, and one by one people had a compulsion to go and see what was on the island, but they never came back. Why didn't they come back? Was it of their own choice, or had they been kidnapped or even killed? People began to be a bit wiser and stayed away, until a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky over the island. It was like a big coloured balloon, and floated over to Fair Oaks, and then to their amazement all the people who hadn't come back were waving and coming over in boats, following the big balloon. Everybody crowded to the beach to find out what had been happening in the 6 months they'd been away, but they could only talk while the balloon was over them. If it moved off, they were silent. John and Jane's mum picked John and Jane up and ushered them indoors, but they wouldn't or couldn't talk. So in the end, the only way to hear what they'd been doing was to take them back to the big balloon. It seems as if the island was magic. I suppose we'd guessed that. It was owned by a wizard called Bragg, who had come from another island across the sea. The trouble was, Bragg was lonely, and the only way he could have company was to kidnap people through their minds and wills to come and live with him. Now he had so many people on his island he wanted to be alone again, and had forgotten the magic which magicked them back to their own life in Fair Oaks. He had come for help and was very angry about all the kerfuffle and excitement, but every time he tried to go back to his island, the balloon and all the people followed him. What was to be done? A few more people had joined the group now, as they didn't want their friends to disappear again, but they didn't go on the island, they just swam round it, and they worried Bragg. He couldn't catch them unless they came on the island, and he began to feel trapped. Those already caught were obeying him at every turn, and they got on his nerves. This wasn't company or freedom, this was prison. One day he decided to creep off the island in the dark and reach inland. He managed this without waking anybody. Even the dark cloud was quiet. He rowed towards the land and wondered how he had ever got involved with magic. He would now run away and get a job. When the people woke up in the morning, generally Bragg was there to greet them, and they did what he told them to do. But he wasn't there, and they didn't know what to do. They were controlled by him, not their own will. They were all terrified, even John and Jane, and that's when they realised they were under a spell. Good gracious, what's happened to us? They edged their way to the beach, wondering what had happened. Jane hadn't been to school for ages. John hadn't been to his apprenticeship. They hardly remembered what they'd been doing at school and apprenticeship. It seemed years ago. They looked around, and other people were sobbing and disturbed, looking for Bragg. The cloud had gone, and the balloon, and there was nothing left but an empty island. Where was the food? Did we eat food? Sausages and chips, fish and chips, They all sounded delicious. It was all beginning to come back. "Let's go," they said. Then swimming round the island was their mum and dad, hoping to get a glimpse of their children. "John! Jane!" But John and Jane couldn't speak to them. They were still under some sort of spell. "Oh dear," said Mum and Dad, "what shall we do now?" They decided to go to the police and inform them about the 50 people stranded on the island, emotionally in a bad way. The police couldn't understand what on earth had happened, but decided it was a crime and must be dealt with. They had to find Bragg. Police were contacted and were asked to find a man answering to the name of Bragg, who gave the impression that he was mentally ill and in need of help. Why couldn't the children talk? In an ordinary place like Fair Oaks, nobody knew anything about witchcraft and spells. It was just a fairy tale, that stuff. But now they had to face up to the fact that something very weird was going on. Computers came into play, and before long spells and curses were being talked about. The police found Bragg, but he didn't seem to know anything. He thought it must be an enchanted island, so that was their next landing place. They arrested Bragg, put him in safekeeping, rescued all the people from the island, and put them in a community lock-up until they'd sorted it all out. John and Jane were allowed to stay with Mum and Dad, and in fact were very keen to go and help to find out what was going on. And the police thought they could be of help to them, so they allowed them to go. After a lot of searching and studying various forms of historical fact, they discovered that the island had once been a natural habitat for wild creatures, and many bones were found there, even dinosaurs and dragons. No human had been near the island for hundreds of years, and the animals lived, bred and died, and that was the curse. Animals don't live cultivated lives. They just exist on animal instincts. No morals, no schooling. They ate insects and each other, as well as each other's eggs and fruit from the many bushes and trees. It was known as Hannah. Someone had discovered enough to name the island in this way. Horrible animals nest and numerate abominably. The animals had eventually all died out, but came back to haunt the island, and anyone who came on it was possessed by the spirit of the animals. Bragg was a lonely, unfulfilled man, just ripe for possession, and he now needed other people to possess as well. The dark cloud arrived, the coloured balloon, ghost-like things. So that was it. John and Jane were gradually recovering and were beginning to say a few words from their memory of the past. They started to enjoy everyday life again and went back to school. All the people from the island were gradually recovering too, and the authorities had called in psychologists and psychiatrists, carers and doctors, and gradually they were allowed back into the real world. But Bragg was much too badly infected and became a dangerous animal to have around. In fact, he was just like a dragon, and someone swore that he breathed fire when he got angry. He was kept imprisoned in solitary confinement and died of lack of company. But it was much too dangerous to allow anyone near him, and people were relieved to hear he had died. The island to this day is cordoned around, and people swim round it to have a look, but no one will ever venture there again. They think it will now be haunted by Bragg, and they could be right.